Zohan is all right. Is it making sense? Right. Okay. Now, yesterday we talked about absolute advantage. What is absolute advantage? Absolute advantage very simply says that when a country can produce something in larger quantities, when a country can produce something in larger quantities or at lower per unit cost, right? So when a country can produce something in larger quantities or with lower per unit cost, that country is said to have absolute advantage. I repeat. So when a country can produce something in larger quantities or with lower per unit cost, that country is said to have absolute advantage in that thing. Is this making sense, students? Okay, now what we take on any, like on both the graphs, we have products, right? So let's say you can take any two products on the X and the Y axis. So let's say for now we are taking clothes, right? Just a second, right? The quantities of clothes that are being produced, right? On the Y axis, and the quantity of cars that are being produced by the two countries, right? So on the y-axis, we have quantity of clothes that the two countries are producing, and on the x-axis, we have quantity of cars that are being produced, right? Easy. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, this being said, right? Now, on the same graph, we'll show production possibility curve of both the countries, right? Now, think about this. So let's first make, we can take specific names, or we can just keep the countries' names as A and B, right? Now have a look at this, right? So let's say this production possibility curve is for country A, right? And what this production possibility curve will show, so it has two important points, right? So the point where the PPC intersects with the y-axis, that is this point, and the point where the production possibility curve intersects with the x-axis, which is this point, right? Now, this point on the y-axis will show the maximum quantity of clothes that this country can produce if it allocates all of its resources towards production of clothes. So let's assume if this country A allocates all of its resources towards production of clothes, it can produce 10,000 units of the goods. On the other hand, if it allocates, the point on x-axis will tell you that if this country allocates all of its resources, towards production of cars, what's the maximum unit of cars can this country produce? So here we are assuming that it's 5,000, right? Easy. Right? Is this making sense? 5,000 units of cars if it allocates all of its resources towards production of cars, and 10,000 units of clothes if it allocates all of its resources towards clothes production, right? So this is for country A. Now, similarly, we'll make another production possibility curve, Khadija. So we are just doing, and Zohan, we are doing a recap of what we did yesterday, right? Now, let's say that this is for country B. This blue PVC is for country B, and similarly, it will show the same. That if country B allocates all of its resources towards production of clothes, what's the maximum units of clothes that this country can produce? We are assuming it to be 12,000, right? So if it allocates all of its resources towards production of clothes, the maximum it can produce is 12,000 units of clothes. And if it allocates all of its resources towards production of cars, country B, then it can produce 4,000 units of cars. Is there any confusion so far? No worries, one, right? Okay. Now, what's absolute advantage? So students, do remember, absolute advantage says that when a country can produce something in larger quantities or with lower per unit cost. So when a country can produce something absolute, right? So absolute advantage is when a country can produce something in larger quantities or with lower per unit cost. That is when it's said to have absolute advantage in that product. So yesterday I told you that you don't need to do any calculation for this. To determine that which country has absolute advantage in which thing, you don't even need to do any calculation. All you have to do is to look at their production possibility curves. Now, looking at these production possibility curves, who can tell me that which country has absolute advantage in which thing? In which product, I mean, right? So which of the two countries have absolute advantage in cars? Yeah, right? So it's B has in clothes, because if B allocates all of its resources towards production of clothes, you can see for yourself that B can produce more units of clothes compared to A. And on the other hand, if A allocates all of its resources towards cars, then A can produce more units of cars, which is 5,000 greater than what B can produce. So country A has absolute advantage in cars, and country B has absolute advantage in clothes. Any confusion so far? So that was a very simple and easy way of finding out that which country should specialize in which thing, right? Yes or no? Now, if we take a real life example before we move forward, right? So yeah, so think about this. So if you think about, let's say if we compare countries like, let's say Pakistan, and let's say we are talking about Pakistan and, or let's say India and China. Why I'm comparing India and China? Because they're relatively same size. I mean, not exactly, but still both are big economies and so on and so forth, right? So if we compare India and China, right? Now, let's say there are two products that they both can produce, let's say televisions and televisions, um, and some agricultural crop, let's say sugarcane, right? Or sugar, let's say, right? Now, if China can produce more units of, China has absolute advantage in sugar, which means what, right? So either China can produce more units of more quantity of sugar, or per unit cost of sugar in China is less than India, right? So if let's say each kg of sugar costs 0.5 dollars or 50 cents, right? In China, whereas this is 0.55 dollars in India, right? Now think about this. If there is an importing country, if there is a country that has to import sugar, right? Obviously, it will look for cheaper option, right? So let's say if US is importing, or even if Pakistan has to import, forget about the relations we have with India, right? But if Pakistan has to import, right? So Pakistan will prefer to buy from China because their sugar is relatively cheaper compared to Indian sugar. Yes or no, right? On the other hand, if India can produce larger quantities of television, or if let's say a typical television in India costs, let's say $600, right? Whereas in China, it costs something more, let's say $630, right? Now, again, which of the two countries will you prefer to import televisions from, right? So obviously you'll prefer to buy from India, given the fact that the cost is less. So most probably the price will also be low, right? Let me repeat myself. If the cost of producing something is cheaper in a country, most probably its price will also be lower, because obviously the country is smart, knowing the fact that if they can produce something for cheap, they will want to keep their prices relatively low compared to their competitors, so that they can export and they can earn foreign exchange. Are you getting me or not, right? Students, is there any confusion so far regarding absolute advantage? So that's what absolute advantage says. When a country can produce something in larger quantities or with lower per unit cost, that is when a country has absolute advantage in that things. And just by looking at the graph, we can see that B can produce more units of clothes. So B has absolute advantage in clothes. A can produce more units of cars. So A has absolute advantage in cars. So A should specialize in cars and B should specialize in clothes. But this becomes a little tricky, and that is the main focus of our today's class, when we look at two countries which can produce, which have a very different size, right? Let me give you first, write their names, right? Let's take some examples first and then move on, right? So let's stick to the example that we were discussing. So we have televisions and television sets and sugar, right? Okay. Now, if we are comparing, let's say, China with Sri Lanka or Nepal, right? Something, some very smaller country. Will it be must that if a country will have absolute advantage, also have enjoying economies of scale if it specializes in it? That's a good question, Zohan. So Zohan is asking that if a country has absolute advantage in that thing, right? Now let's try to understand what it means, right? So absolute advantage means that you can produce something cheaply compared to other countries. Easy? Is this simple? Which means that there will be more demand for your product. Simple example, let me give you an example. So if Pakistan can produce cotton cheaply compared to India, China, and other countries that export cotton, most probably, obviously, Other countries would prefer to buy Pakistani cotton because it's relatively cheap. So then it means that since profit margins are higher for cotton producers in Pakistan, they would want to specialize in that. Zohan, are you following me? The chain of events and everyone else, right? So if Pakistan has absolute advantage in cotton, which means we can produce cotton at a lower cost, other countries countries that have to import cotton will prefer Pakistani cotton because it's cheap, no rocket science. Since there will be more demand for Pakistani cotton, there will be high profit margins for cotton producers, and therefore they will want to specialize in cotton. When they start producing more of cotton, we know what will that do? We will be producing larger quantities of cotton. And when you produce larger quantities of cotton, what happens? Your average total cost starts to decrease. So it's quite likely. We can't say for sure. We can't say for sure, but most probably yes. The answer is yes, because absolute advantage means you specialize in that and therefore you produce more quantities. When you produce more quantities, you benefit from economies of scale, meaning your average total cost decreases. Country has less production capacity, but enjoying economies of scale. The demand for its products will be more compared to country having absolute advantage. Less production capacity, okay, but enjoying economies of scale. How will it be enjoying economies of scale if it has less capacity? The demand for its products will be more. I mean, that can happen, Zohan. So think about this. What you are saying is, I totally got your point. But if you compare, okay, let's put it down like this. So let's say Bangladesh and Pakistan, right? So Bangladesh is relatively much smaller country compared to Pakistan in terms of area, in terms of the land that they have, in terms of even the population that they have, right? So it's less likely that Bangladesh, and if the two countries are producing the same product, it's less likely that Bangladesh can benefit from as much economies of scale as much we can, right? Similarly, if you compare Pakistan and India, so the economies of scale that India can benefit from, we can't really benefit much. Are you getting me, right? So India being a bigger country, there's more demand, there will be more output being produced and so on, right? So it's less likely. But I mean, in some cases, it's possible. I mean, not always what I said is true, because I mean, it also depends on the type of product, right? And what type of resources you have to produce those. So in some products, Bangladesh can still have lower cost compared to Pakistan because their resources are more suited towards production of that product, right? So simple example could be, let's say, finished goods, right? So cotton might be cheaper in Pakistan, but the finished goods might be cheaper in Bangladesh. Why? Because the technology might be more superior. The machines, the factories that produce clothes, like the finished ready-made clothes that you go and buy from shops, those might be cheaper in Bangladesh, even though cotton is more expensive compared to Pakistan because they're using more superior technology, machines that they use in their production factories. I mean, they do less wastage. Labor is more trained, more qualified. They do less wastage, right? They produce more output, less time. Yeah. So, I mean, it totally depends from case to case. Easy, students, we good on this? Okay. Now moving on to comparative advantage, students, now you have to pay close attention to what happens over here, right? Now let's assume we are comparing China with Bangladesh, right? Now, if you think about the size of the two countries, right? I mean, Bangladesh is a much smaller economy, or Nepal or any other country you want to, assume, compared to China, right? So it's likely, I mean, not always, but it's likely that Bangladesh or China, being a larger country, will be able to produce more of both the goods. China, being a bigger economy compared to the other country, will be able to produce larger quantities of both the products compared to Bangladesh. Yes or no, right? Now, just by looking at the graph, we can tell that China has absolute advantage in students, both the things. Yes or no? Am I making sense to you? Right? China has absolute advantage in both the products, right? Now, what I was trying to tell you yesterday, that what does it mean? So if our assumption says that there are only two countries in the world and they have to trade among themselves, right? That was the assumption, right? So if there are only two products in the world, sorry, two countries in the world. So let me take you back to the assumptions where we wrote, right? So there are only two countries in the world which are trading among themselves. And obviously they have to trade. I mean, it's not that China can produce all the products and, Bangladesh is just sitting and doing nothing. So what will Bangladesh do with its resources? Obviously, it has to put its resources to some use, right? Now, the idea here, students, is that since China has absolute advantage in both the products, absolute advantage model would say that China should produce both the products. But that comes with a lot of challenge. That comes with a problem. And that problem is then what will Bangladesh do with its resources? Just leave them idle, not do anything and import? How can Bangladesh import when it's not exporting anything? We assumed it's a barter system. Yes or no? So when you're not exporting anything, how can you import anything? Yes or no? You need to give and take, right? Now, when absolute advantage model fails, that's where the comparative advantage model comes in. Now, comparative advantage model, which we could not complete yesterday and we will do it today, says that if a country can produce something at lower, so if a country can produce something at lower opportunity cost, with lower opportunity cost, that's the product in which it has comparative advantage. So if a country can produce something with lower opportunity cost, students, are you following me? Now, what is opportunity cost? This is not something new. Something new for us, right? We already know that is the product. It has comparative advantage in. Okay, think about this, students. Now, what is opportunity cost? Opportunity cost is the benefit of the next best alternative forgone. What is opportunity cost? Opportunity cost is the benefit of the next best alternative forgone. Yes or no? Let's make a table over here, right? Okay, now think about this. If you produce something, obviously you give up on another thing. Yes or no? That's the idea, right? If a country, think about this. So if a country is producing one product, right? Let's say cars, or let's say wheat, or let's say sugar, or whatever that might be, right? It will be definitely giving up on something else, right? So it could have used same resources to produce something else, right? Yes or no? So that's what opportunity cost is. Now, how do we calculate, comparative advantage for these countries? That's what we are about to look at. So you have country A, country B, and let's say you have any two products, could be cars, phones. You can take any name of any other two products which you feel like, right? Okay, now I'm just entering some arbitrary values, right? So let's say country A can produce 1,000 cars, and if it allocates all of its resources towards cars. On the other hand, if it allocates all of its resources towards phones, the maximum amount quantity of phones it can produce is 3,000. On the other hand, country B can produce, if it allocates all of its resources towards cars, it can produce 5,000 units of cars. And if it allocates all of its resources towards production of phones, it can produce, let's say, 2,500 units of phones. Any confusion so far, students? If there's any confusion, right? So this information is being provided to us. Now, based on these values, we will calculate which country has comparative advantage in which thing. Okay. Okay. Now, what you need to do, students, please stay with me because some students find this confusing. Country A, right? Now, country A, we will simplify the ratios for country A. So it is basically 1,000 ratio, 1,000 ratio, 3,000. Yes or no? Right? 1,000 ratio, 3,000. Cars ratio, phones, right? So 1,000 cars in relation to 3,000 phones. Any confusion so far? Students, in maths, what we know that we can simplify a ratio by dividing the two numbers with the smaller number. I repeat, we know in maths that we can simplify a ratio, 1,000 ratio 3,000. So we can simplify this ratio just by dividing both the numbers with the same value, which is lower of the two. Which is lower of the two? 1,000 and 3,000. 1,000 is lower, so we just divide both the numbers with 1,000. So 1,000, 1,000 gets cancelled out. That gives you 1 ratio 3. Confusion? Confusion, right? Shouldn't be simple, right? Okay. Now, for country B, we'll do something similar. So now country B, right, is 5,000 ratio, 5,000 ratio 2,500. Now, the problem is if we divide in this case with the smaller of the two numbers, then it would not give us the ideal, it will not give us the ideal scenario in which we wanted it to be, right? So if we divide both the numbers, if you divide, divide both the values with the same number, which is 2500, I mean, that will give us 1 over here, whereas we want to bring 1 in the case of cars. Are you getting me? Okay, let's start off with a simple example, because you must be thinking, okay, let's take a simple example first, and then we'll come to something more complicated. So let's say this is 5,000 ratio 20,000, right? So let's start off with the simple example, right? Okay, right. So 2:1. I didn't want it to be 2:1, Zohan. There was a reason. I'll explain you why is that the case, right? Okay. Now, students, think about this. So we just like we simplified the ratio for country A, cars, phones. So that shows us 1:3. Similarly, we'll do it for country B. So that will be 5,000 ratio 20,000. Easy. Now we divide both the numbers with the smaller of the two numbers. Which of the two is smaller? Which of the two is smaller, guys? Obviously 5,000 is smaller. Confusion, right? So these two gets cancelled out, right? And then it gives you 1 ratio. What does it give you? It gives you 1:4. 1:4. Confusion, right? 20,000 divided by 5,000 is 4, right? Okay. Now let's interpret this. Now comes in the main part of interpreting. To produce one car, students, stay with me. To produce 1 unit of car or 1 car, country A has to give up how many units of phones? To produce 1 car, country A has to give up on 3 units of phones. How many units of phones? 3 units of phones. Confusion, right? Easy, right? On the other hand, for country B to produce 1 unit of car, it has to give up on 4 units of cars. Sorry, 4 units of phones. For country B to produce 1 unit of car, it has to give up on 4 units of phones. Easy. So which of the two countries has lower opportunity cost of producing cars? Which of the two countries has lower opportunity cost of producing cars? A. What about others? Do you all think A has lower opportunity cost of producing cars? Right? Right? So the answer is A. Yes. Why? Because just think about this. You have to give up on 3 phones to produce a car for country A. In the case of B, you have to give up on 4 units of, what am I saying? In case of country A, you have to give up on 3 units of phones to produce a car. In case of country B, you have to give up on 4 units of phones to produce a car. So country B is giving up more phones to produce a car compared to A. Country B is giving up on more units of phones to produce a car compared to A. Yes or no? So country A has lower opportunity cost for producing cars, right? So therefore, you will say country A has comparative advantage, has comparative advantage in cars. Country A has comparative advantage in cars. Confusion? Anything else you want to? Okay, now let's do it the other way around. Let's do it the other way around so that we are absolutely clear that our calculation is correct, right? Now, instead of doing for cars, let's do it for phones. Instead of doing for cars, let's do it for phones, right? Now, this was the original value, right? 1,000 ratio 3,000, right? And these were the original values, 5,000 ratio 20,000. Confusion, students? Is there any confusion? Anything you want to ask me? Okay. Now, instead of dividing both the numbers with 1,000, how about we not always do that? We divide this by 3,000, right? So we divide both the numbers with 3,000. Why am I doing that? And similarly, in this case, the bigger of the two numbers. So we are dividing it with 20,000, and we will also divide this with 20,000. Easy. Students, confusion? So that gives you 1 ratio what? That will give you 1 ratio. 1 divided by 3 is how much? 0.3, 0.33. Let's keep it to 2 decimal places. In fact, let's round it off to 0.34. Easy. Confusion? Anything not clear, right? Now, when we do this over here, so it will give you 1 ratio. It will give you 1 ratio. 1 divided by, 5 divided by 20,000 is 1/4. 1/4 is 0.25, right? I mean, 1 divided by 4, yeah, 1/4, right? Okay, so this gives you 0.1 ratio 0.25, right? Now let's think about this. In fact, you tell me, in this case, to produce one phone, how many units of cars country A has to give up on? 0.34. Whereas to produce 1 unit of phone, country B has to give up on 0.25 units of cars. Which country? Let's repeat this. I know this is confusing. That's why I'm spending a lot of time, and a lot of students get confused with this. So I don't want you to leave my class confused. Now, why we did that? First of all, let me tell you. Initially, I said that you divided by the smaller number. I take my words back, right? Technically, it depends which of the two sides you want to make a unitary number, right? Which of the two sides. So if you want to make phones the unitary number, so whatever the number value of phones you have, you divide both the numbers with that. So initially, in the first scenario, if you remember, we divided both numbers, 1,000 and 3,000 with 1,000. In this case, we're dividing both the numbers 1,000 and 3,000 with 3,000 because we want phones to come as one, right? Because number divided by number is the same, is 1. X divided by X is what? 1, right? Yes or no? Got it? Easy? Okay, then you use calculator, you simplify, there's no rocket science in that, right? Now, let's interpret, that's the main part. To produce 1 unit of phones, country A has to give up on 0.34 units because that is kind of, think of it as equivalent, right? To produce 1 phone, country A has to give up on 0.34 units of cars. Whereas to produce 1 unit of phone, country B only has to give up on 0.25 units of cars. Getting me? So which country, yes, Zohan, let me answer that for you. Which country has lower opportunity cost of making phones? Which country is giving up on, anyone apart from Zohan, which country is giving up less units of cars to produce a phone? Because that is what lower opportunity cost means. Which country is giving up on lesser units of cars to produce phones? That's the question, right? It's yes, right? B, exactly. Very good, Khadija Zwan, right? Khazir, did you get this? Like if we have to find ratio of cars, we want to divide cars value each and vice versa for phone. Exactly. Yes, Zwan, that's correct, right? Is this making sense? So now let's do another example. First of all, or let's put it simple way. If you have already calculated comparative advantage of one country with another country, if you've already found that one country has comparative advantage in one thing, mathematically, I repeat myself, if you have calculated using simplifying ratios that one country has comparative advantage in one product, then mathematically it will be true that the other country will have comparative advantage in the other thing. Did you guys get this or not? So initially, if you remember, we calculated the comparative advantage of country A in cars. So since we have already done that, given the example we are using, be assured that the other country, which is B, will have comparative advantage in the other thing, which is phones. Are you getting me, right? So it shouldn't be that difficult. But let's take another example. Khizr, right? Is everything clear? Right? Okay, let's do another example, quick example. If you have your calculators, good. If you don't have your calculators, then I don't know how you do that, right? You can do it on your phones. Okay, so, right, students, let's. Okay, now here, let's say you have, let's take some real life, China and India, right? Some real names, sorry. Right? So you have China and you have India, right? India, and the two products that we're looking at could be anything, let's say sugar and let's say television, right? Okay, now let's say China can produce, if it allocates all of its resources towards production of sugar, 25,000 units of sugar. And if China allocates all of its resources towards production of television, it can produce 8,000 units of television. Similarly, if India allocates all of its resources towards production of sugar, it can produce, let's say, 18,000 units of sugar. And if it allocates all of its resources, towards production of television, it can produce, let's say, 6,000 units of television, right? Okay, now I want you to quickly do this calculation and let me know then. And then we'll do it in the class as well. Take 1 or 2 minutes, take more than 2 minutes, right? Do this calculation and then we'll do it together. Right. Yeah, you can use your calculator. Yeah, totally. I mean, calculators are allowed on economics exam, so you don't need to worry about it. It's not a maths test. So use the same strategy, write it down first in the form of ratio, then choose one side, either choose sugar or either choose television. And whatever the value of sugar is, divide that both the numbers with that number of sugar. Or if you want to simplify the television thing, so you divide both the numbers with the value of the television and then interpret it. I mean, yeah, if you have excess, do that. Is there a calculator in Zoom? Apps, what apps are there? Oh, screen has the calculator. Okay, gotcha. It's 25,000, Juan. There are 3 zeros. Again, it's 18,000, not 1,800. Yeah. China is, okay, 1:3.2, 1:3.2, and India is 1:3.3. Give me the final answer, Khadija. Which country has comparative advantage in which thing? That's the main thing. Which country has comparative advantage in which thing? Yeah. Zohan, you also tell me. Right? So the calculation part was correct. Now have a look at this. Students, have a look at this. The calculation part, Zohan, that you did was correct, right? So think about this. What you have to do simply, as Zohan was showing us on the screen, so you divide both sides with one of the two numbers, right? So in this case, right now, we're trying to simplify for country China. For China, we're trying to simplify the value of sugar, right? So 25,000 divided by 25,000 and 8,000 divided by 25,000. Easy, simple, right? So when you do that, 25 divided by 25 is obviously 1, right? So that would be 1, right? You cancel these two out, right? So that's 1 ratio. And this is 0.32, right? As per the calculation that you did, right? Then when you do it for India, right? So you do the same thing. So whatever the value of sugar for India is, that's 18,000. You divide both the numbers with 18,000, right? So that would give you 1 ratio. So it's 18,000 divided by 6,000 over 18,000. So that gives you 1 ratio. 1 ratio. 6 over 18 is how much? 0.333, right? Now there's a very small difference, but let's assume it's, it's there, right? 0.33, right? Okay. Now these values. Now let's interpret. That's the main part, right? That's the main part where we have to interpret that, right? Now to produce 1 unit, students, stay with me. To produce 1 unit, what was on the left side, sugar. To produce 1 unit of sugar, how many units of television China has to give up on? 0.32. Whereas to produce 1 unit of sugar, India has to give up on 0.33 units of sugar. So which of the two countries has higher opportunity cost? For sugar, it's uh, for sugar, it's China. Yeah, exactly. And India has comparative advantage. Okay. Students, have a look at this. Have a look at this. Just a second. Reading the comments and explaining at the same time is becoming confusing for me. Stay with me. So as far as the calculations are concerned, you both got it correct, right? So it's for China, it's 1:0.32. It's 1:0.32. And for India, it is 1:0.33. Now, the idea is, let's think about it strategically. To produce 1 unit of sugar, China has to give up on 0.32 units of television, 0.32 units of television. Whereas to produce 1 unit of sugar, China has to give up on 0.33 units of. China has to give up on 0.33 units of television. So since, sorry, did I messed it up? To produce 1 unit of sugar, China has to give up on 0.32 units of television. Whereas to produce 1 unit of sugar, India has to give up on 0.33 units of television. So India is giving up more units of television to produce 1 unit of sugar, whereas China is giving up on lesser units of television to produce 1 unit of sugar. Is this making sense or not? So which of the two countries have comparative advantage in which? Right? Guys, what are you doing? Zohan, you were correct. How is 0.33 a smaller value? 0.33 is a bigger value compared to 0.32. Are you getting? It's not a negative number. It's not a negative number, right? So 0.35 is bigger than 0.3. Got it? Right? So you were correct. So Khadija, did you get this part? Let's look at this one more time, students. Let's look at this one more time. So no worries. So to produce 1 unit of sugar, China is giving up on 0.32 units of television. China is giving up on 0.32 units of television, right? Which is less in case of India compared to India. How? Because to produce 1 unit of sugar, India has to give up on 0.33 units of television. So India is giving more units of television to produce 1 unit of sugar, whereas China is giving up on lesser units of television to produce sugar. So China's opportunity cost to produce sugar is less. I repeat, China's opportunity cost to produce sugar is less. So what is comparative advantage? Comparative advantage is when a country can produce something with lower opportunity cost. That's why I place so much emphasis on interpreting the values, because that's the main part. So China's opportunity cost of producing sugar is less. How do we know? Because it's only giving up on 0.32 units of television to produce 1 unit of sugar, whereas India is giving up on 0.33 units of television to produce 1 unit of sugar. So since China is giving up on lower units of television to produce sugar, so China's opportunity cost of producing sugar is less, and therefore China has comparative advantage in sugar. Therefore, China has comparative advantage in sugar. Khadija, did you get this? You want me to explain again? Right? So got it. Khizr, is this clear? Right? So students, that's how when absolute advantage fails. So what was the example we started off with? So when absolute advantage fails because one country is bigger than the other country, and it can produce more units of both the goods, then that is where the comparative advantage comes into place. And how do you simplify? You simplify the ratios as I told you, and then how do you interpret? That's how you interpret, right? So I mean, from exam point of view, essay questions, you never see an essay question, full-fledged essay question about absolute and comparative advantage, but they do test you on the MCQs, right? So I think for this part, I mean, this much information is good enough. Tomorrow we'll do one more topic, that is trade barriers, protectionism. free trade, protectionism, trade barriers, what are different type of trade barriers like quotas, duties, customs, right? So all these things. Then we'll be done with unit 4 and then we'll start off with unit 5. Inshallah, hopefully before February, we will be done with our AS economics syllabus. Then we'll do a crash course with a lot of focus on, with a lot of past papers practice and all that, right? So tomorrow I'll see you at the same time, students, right? And hopefully tomorrow we'll complete off with unit 4 after talking about free trade, protectionism and all that, right? And then move to the last unit, which is very small. I mean, should not take us more than 2